to Subodh for inviting me, and thanks everybody for coming. Thanks to the organizer for making this possible. Briefly about me. My name is Beno. I'm from Slovenia. I'm based in Abu Dhabi, and I've been there for a long time. Some say too long, but anyway, I manage. I've been a visualizer, architectural visualizer, and 3D animator for about 17, 18 years. So this is what I've been doing for a long time, and this is where I've learned a lot of Photoshop. This is what I've learned 3D animation. This is where I've developed my eye to see things. And all this time, I actually never held camera in my hand. So the first time I actually picked up my camera is when I created my first time-lapse, which was in April 2011. So up to that point, I actually never operated a physical camera. I operated a virtual camera in a 3D world, in imaginary worlds. But the rules of composition, the way you design a picture, the way you see things, the way you compose light and shadows, and all the rules of photography, I basically learned them in a virtual world, not in the physical world. But I learned later on, when I actually held the camera for the first time, that the same rules applied. So if you could take a picture in a 3D world, you could take a picture in a real world, as long as you knew what the buttons did. So once I knew what the shutter button did, what the aperture meant, what shutter meant, the relationship of depth of field, the lens, and all the rules that you need to know about the camera, I think I was ready in about probably 10 days. So I went basically from no photographer at all to somewhat of a photographer in a very, very short period. And instead of trying myself in photography, producing stills, I tried myself doing time-lapse photography, which is a very strange way of entering photographic world, which was basically a world that enters photography through motion rather than through stills. Why time-lapse photography? Time-lapse photography is something that fascinated me for a very, very long time. First time I've seen it was in the, I don't know if you know the film, it's called Kuyanis Katsi, very strange movie with a very strange name. It was made in the 80s by an American director called Godfrey Reggio. He's an experimental filmmaker that creates films without any words. They're called the non-narrative pictures. So you watch them, they tell a story without a single word spoken and without a single subtitle to be read. And yet, it's a pure language of visuals. So there's a story, definitely, just not presented in a conventional way. And the way he does it is by using, well, experimental cinematography. He would be using slow motion photography, time-lapse photography, and just a regular motion photography, and combine them in some way that when you watch that, it is intriguing, it is fascinating, and you can't look away, essentially. And you will get a story that is very, very, very interesting. So, time-lapse photography, I don't know how many people actually heard of photography. I mean, have you experimented with it? You're familiar with it? No? 2, 3 people, 5 people? Okay, that's not a lot. Time-lapse photography actually is very old. I've been doing some research and actually found out that it's, in fact, as old as the cinema itself. The first experiment of time-lapse photography was by a French filmmaker in 1897. His name is Georges Méliès, and he's in fact one of the pioneers of cinema. So the cinema, which is what, over 120 years old right now, this is how time-lapse old is right now. But these were very, very shy attempts, which were in fact not mainstream. Not a lot of people actually got to it. These little experiments then accumulated later on in the early 1810s and early 1920s, where a lot of people start experimenting with it, but never in the mainstream. You would not find it in a major motion picture. Those were little, lab films that geeks knew about, but it never actually got into anything important and significant. It wasn't Dr. Ott in the 50s. He is in fact the major pioneer of time-lapse photography, who was a guy who was banker by day and a time-lapse photographer during the night. And his specialty was photographing plants, their growth, in fact, in the little arboretum or a greenhouse that he actually had in his backyard. That would be his fascination. He would have his cameras and he would have them on a motion control dolly back in the 50s. and he would photograph those plants. And he was obscure, nobody actually heard about him, but he built a huge library of films that suddenly got discovered in the 80s. And when he came out in the 80s, he came up with his DVD, in fact, later on in the 90s, but in the 80s, the film came and it was picked up by Disney. And these little clips were then featured in various documentaries and various films, and suddenly everybody knew about time-lapse. So he was the major guy. He really, really put time-lapse on the map. He actually created the word time-lapse photography. And the major breakthrough, like I said before, was Godfrey Reggio with his film Koyanis Katsi, and later on became a trilogy of the films. And this film changed everything, because from that point onwards, everybody wanted to have time-lapse in one way or another, either incorporated into their films, into their documentaries, into the video spots, in the TV commercials, because right now, you probably cannot find a film, even without thinking that there's always a little bit of time-lapse somewhere here and there. In every popular TV series, in every popular motion picture, not a lot, but a little bit will be in there. And it's not just for no purpose. It's not just because it looks sexy or pretty. It's there because it means something. So if you need to have a scene and you need to emphasize that a time had passed from the first to the second scene, there is no better way of doing it than with a little time-lapse sequence of that day changing to night or night changing to day. It's a very simple way of saying that this character had traveled or the time had passed. And they use it practically everywhere right now. In fact, lately, me being now in film production, there are very few TV commercials right now that do not have a request on a storyboard for 1 or 2 or 3 or even 10 time-lapse sequences. It seems to be, it's a hot thing right now. And in fact, I've seen just recently a TV commercial by Diwa of Dubai, where entire TV commercial is made of time-lapses. And it just features Dubai left and right, and later on a little bit of CG animation, and the story is told. So I've been fascinated by it, like I said, from Koyanis Katsi onwards, which was back in the 80s, and I was a little kid. I liked it. I had no idea how it was made, but I had it at the back of my mind. So I said, one day I'll try it, which I did. Like I said, in April 2011, I picked up my camera. I had it for about 7 days. That was the Canon 5D Mark II. And 7 days later, I decided to make my first time-lapse film. So having a 5D Mark II and another 60D and plus PowerShot G9 little camera, I put everything in my camera bag and I started visiting various locations in Abu Dhabi, mostly inaccessible locations, which is usually rooftops. In Abu Dhabi, it's a little bit more difficult than in Dubai. It's a bit harder, but because I've been in the visualization industry for a long time, I dealt with a lot of architects and real estate developers. I had access to these places that normally someone else would not be, so that was my little privilege. So I accessed those places and I filmed my time-lapse sequences and I shot a couple of them. I brought them back on my computer and I was like, this is it. This is exactly how I need to actually carry on right now until the end of the film, which became a bit of an obsession that lasted 8 weeks. 8 weeks I was on a roof every single night continuously until I had a library of nearly 35,000 pictures. And this is when the real hard work started. Those pictures, they have to be converted into video, and that's not easy because you're dealing with a lot of files. And to have just 1 second of motion video, you need to have 25 pictures, 25 frames. And you're dealing with 20, 25 MB files. So converting those and making them to a video, that lasted like probably 3 weeks just of crunching the data in a computer and converting that into a video. And then I still had to edit the video, make it look into some kind of a film. I created some kind of a narrative, some kind of a dialogue. Then I paired up with a very talented musician, Vladimir Persan, who's definitely the most talented musician right now in the country. And he was glad enough to help me out. He created the beautiful soundtrack that went with this time-lapse film, and then I released it. And then it happened. The feedback was overwhelming, and before I actually go into all that, I would think probably at this point show you the film for those who have not seen it yet, and then I'll talk a little bit of how it was actually done. Brian? Situation. Wake up? Okay. made. A bit of light, please. Yeah, thanks. Even though you're making a picture, at the end of the day, you're making a motion picture. Your tool is a camera. That's the very confusing part. Why use a still camera to make a film? A lot of people are asking me, why don't you just use a video camera and then just speed up the footage? Probably wondering, right? It makes a very, it's a perfectly good argument. You could do it, in fact. In fact, there are even ways, and there are even scenarios where you would want to use the video camera and just speed it up because it's simpler, it's easier. You put your camera on a tripod, you press the record button, and 10 seconds later, you got time-lapse footage. Just make it a little bit faster. With a still camera, there's so much work. First of all, you have to be there with the camera. You have to take pictures with big, spread-out intervals, and then 3-4 hours later, you maybe have 10 seconds worth of footage, and then you still need to post-process it. Before you're done, half a day or a whole day be gone, and you have 15 seconds of footage. It's not exactly the most productive thing. So time-lapses take a lot of patience. So the question is, why do it with a still camera if you can do it with a video camera? The reason for that is purely technical. Video camera shoots 25 frames per second. You can make it brighter, you can make it darker, but the frame rate always stays at 25 frames per second. You can't change that. If you translate that into photography, that means your each exposure is exactly 1/50th of a second. You can't make it 1/30th, you can't make it 1/100th, you can't make it 6 seconds. It has to be exactly 1/50th of a second in order to have your 25 frames per second. And that is a big problem when you're shooting time-lapse photography. Primarily when you're shooting at night. When you're shooting at night, you don't have a lot of light. And you want your picture to be bright. How are you going to do that if you're shooting 1/50th of a second? You can increase the ISO a lot, and with that you're going to get a lot of grain and a lot of noise. And with that, you're still shooting 1/50th of a second. Any moving object is still going to be quite sharp. It's not going to leave beautiful trails. You can only have that when you're shooting still camera on a long exposure. And that's primarily why you would use a still camera. With still camera, you can space out your exposures, and each exposure can be as long as you want. It's a creative decision. How long do you want exposure to be? That is a creative decision of the photographer. How long do you want the trail to be? You want the trail to be very short? You want the trail of a car to be very long? That's a creative call. If you know how long the trail you want, based on that, you decide how long you want the exposure to be. And there are certain rules in time-lapse. Experienced time-lapser will tell you that, faster the moving objects, faster you want to shoot it. A very fast moving object, you have to shoot it very slowly. So you want to basically equalize the speed of your time-lapse. You want all the objects to move more or less at the same speed. So if you look at the clouds and they have no motion whatsoever, you'd like them to look like, like a thunderous wave of water, a lot more exciting. You would probably have to have longer intervals so that you can actually, when you play that in real time, see an actual motion in the sky. So usually that goes for about 5 to 10 seconds. So if you want to shoot clouds and you want to have beautiful motion, you would probably space out your intervals to be every 5 seconds. If they're very slow moving, you would make that every 10 seconds. So when you play that in real time, you will find them in proper motion. People, they're quite actually fast moving comparing to clouds. I mean, I can actually see a person walking. You cannot see cloud moving unless it's a really low cloud. So you would make an interval to be much faster, usually 1, maybe 2 seconds. So every 2 seconds you would take one picture of a person. Likewise for the cars. There are certain things that you want to time-lapse, like decay of a fruit or growth of a plant. Now those things are much slower than, for example, a moving cloud. So there probably you would take one picture every half an hour. So you can imagine, you want to have 1 second of footage, you have to shoot one picture every half an hour, multiplied by 25, the day is just gone. Just to have 1 second of footage. So like I said, it's not the most productive thing you can do with your life. It takes a lot of patience, and it serves its purpose. At the end of the day, time-lapse serves its purpose. You can't use it just everywhere, like I said, because it looks cool. It has to make sense. So first of all, know where you're going to use it, what for, and then decide how you're going to shoot it. At the end of the day, you're supposed to create a picture, a motion picture. And it has to fit within a certain narrative. It has to enhance the film. It's not just there for the sake of it. And anyway, This was the first learning experience. It was a very steep one, costly one, because I just learned I need a lot of time, costly in sense of time. But very, very satisfying, because time-lapse has this unbelievable thing. It is absolutely, and I mean by very definition, magic. It's not like still photography. Still photography, you will take one picture, and by the time you actually see the picture on a viewfinder or on an LCD, this is pretty much, more or less, what you're going to have in the final product, with slight difference, right? You're going to take a picture, raw file, you're going to bring it into Photoshop, Lightroom, do a minor tweak, but it's probably 99% of what you saw in the viewfinder. Big difference between a still frame and a time-lapse is the time-lapse, when you're shooting a picture, you're only seeing one fraction of the longer story, right? You don't know what the longer story is until you've gone from A to B. So to shoot your frames, you have to first of all wait, process them, edit them into a film, and then watch to actually understand what is it that you captured. Your eye can't see because you're actually watching the time between the frames. When I'm standing on top of the roof and I'm actually seeing some, I don't know, a pattern of cars filling up the parking, I see one car moving very, very slowly, and he's desperate. He's looking for his spot, and he will make 3 or 4 circles until he actually finds his spot. Then another car will come out. He's going to move out of his way. He's going to get out. And the third car, you watch that. You know, you've done it. You're fighting with this parking every day. Nothing exciting. It's boring. Time lapse. You shoot that for 1 hour, 3 hours, or 6 hours, and you will see this whole story emerging. And you will suddenly see there's a very, very intricate choreography to this whole thing. Cars filling up the parking. It's like a dance. It's absolutely. It's like an organized chaos. You're wondering how come this cars, they're moving very frantically, very quickly, and you're wondering how come they don't crash into each other. And yet, you know, somehow it makes sense. You know, he goes frantically, he finds his space, he goes out, and it's a dance, and suddenly you're seeing this parking emerging and becoming a parking and then disappearing. So again, it's the art of seeing the invisible. This is probably the most accurate description of time-lapse. It's the art of seeing the invisible. Whatever is too subtle, too gentle, too delicate for the eye to record, because our brain works somewhat in a 25 frames per second real time, time-lapse will expose whatever is invisible to your eye. Just like slow motion does it, by freezing the moment you can see certain things that you could never see because they're happening too quickly. Likewise, time-lapse will expose all those things that are happening too slowly for you to notice. So time-lapse brings the world that is too slow on your real-time level. And whatever is moving very, very quickly, you will use slow motion to bring it down again, down to your level. It's about bringing stuff to the level we can actually perceive, where our brain can actually record. So converting the mundane, boring, invisible to long, this is where you need time-lapse. And this is the purpose and the job of time-lapse. And this is why it works probably so effectively in TV commercials, in movies, in documentaries, especially nature documentaries, where you have to see, for example, seasonal change, going from spring to summer to winter, seeing snow melt, trees grow, decay, see the plant growing, flowers opening, or decaying of a fruit. Stuff like that. There's really nothing else but time-lapse photography. It's your only solution. And like I said, that you cannot do with a video camera because you are limited by 1/50th of a second, and it cannot change. With a still camera, it is your call. I can call it 1 hour, I can call it one picture every one day. It's really completely up to me. Or I can show the construction of a whole tower over a period of, let's say, 5 years. I will put one camera and I will take one picture per day. That's it. At a certain time, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, every day for 5 years. And you will see a picture grow, you will see an actual building constructed. So there's a purpose for that too. Contractors will ask you to do that so they can actually document their progress and submit it then to the real estate development company. Or real estate development company is going to use it to sue the contractor because they were late. They will actually use it in the court. So there are lots of purposes. Like I said, there's a market for it. There is a time-lapse for every scenario. And like I said, right now, it seems to be peaking. 2012 and 13, I don't know if you've been online lately, on Vimeo, on YouTube, but there seems to be an absolute, it's gone viral. I mean, it's gone like a disease. It's everywhere. Type time-lapse, you're going to get millions of hits. Everybody's making time-lapses. Why? Why now? Why not before? Very simple. You were shooting on film. You want to shoot 25,000 pictures on film? Good luck to you. So, digital essentially made it very accessible. It made it cheap. First of all, it's very cheap to buy camera. They are very accessible. They don't cost a lot. Memory cards have become very cheap again. Memory cards, big deal. 64 GB card, like that, in 3 hours gone. You're going to need a lot of 64 GB cards. You're going to need a lot of 128 GB cards if you're actually serious. So it's just really consuming your data. You're consuming your hard drives. You're consuming your memory cards. Your camera is going to get red hot after shooting all day. But they are capable. They have unbelievable resolution. They're accessible. They are cheap. Memory cards have become accessible. The whole technology has become accessible. I call that technology for the masses. That's what it's become. And once technology has become accessible to the masses, suddenly the films are accessible to everyone. And this is why probably time-lapse is actually peaking, because the demand, the cost associated with film developing is not there anymore. It has evaporated. And it's a great thing. Who benefits from that? Everybody. You benefit from it. I benefit from it. Clients benefit from it. Everybody who requires photography, motion pictures, time-lapse, this is the gold era. This is the blooming time. It's the best time to be an artist. It gets even better. You have now the age of social media. Once your film is done, within 1 second, the whole world can see it. So that propagates the art even further. Even more people get inspired. Even more people are buying. Even more people are shooting. And suddenly, you know, before you know, it's gone pandemic. Everybody's shooting time lapses. And with that, the demand for that. And this is probably how BBC noticed my work. And Discovery Channel noticed my work, in fact, this particular film, because within a very short period of time, I got calls from producers from around the world, and we want this, we want that, we want this, we want that. We got very excited. And I started delivering. I started talking to BBC 2 years ago, just a couple of months after the release of this film. And they came over to Abu Dhabi, and they were shooting, they told me, the most ambitious, essentially, documentary ever to come to the Middle East, which is called The Wild Arabia. 3 years in production, shot in many countries all over the Middle East, essentially a nature documentary, but with a twist, because it gave a lot of weight on the humankind, and how the humankind had actually affected this area, and how the natural world had actually wrapped around the effect of the humankind. So this was my opportunity, because they actually had to feature very nice time-lapse scenes, urban scenes of Abu Dhabi as well as Dubai. Initially, they just wanted to have a couple of time-lapses from the Abu Dhabi 2011 film, but when we actually started talking about it, we actually realized that their script wasn't even fully developed yet. They were, coming on the spur of a moment. They were improvising things left and right. So I actually suggested to increase that time-lapse presence in the film, to really communicate this craziness, the explosion of how fast things have happened in this country. It's a big difference between Dubai or Tokyo or in London. All these are big cities, big differences. Dubai took 40 years to construct. Other cities took 300, 2,000. So to say that, there's no better way to say explosion than with time-lapse photography. It's just made for that. It's unmarried. I mean, you want to talk about fast? There you go. So I suggested to actually expand those sequences, to shoot them with motion control systems, to have a motion in the time-lapse sequences, to make it look like Dubai is a place of another world, of another planet. That is something you simply cannot see anywhere in the world, not in terms of scale, not in terms of ambition, not in terms of speed, not in any comparison. And like I said, time-lapse photography, there's no better way of doing that. So I started giving them a couple of experimental shots. I sent it to them, and they went crazy, and they actually decided to rewrite the script and gave a lot more weight to Dubai than originally intended. Dubai was supposed to have about 5-minute coverage. Now it has about 20 minutes. Because, essentially, the footage that they needed to actually tell the story was good enough for them. Therefore, they were feeling comfortable to increase most of the story, to actually wrap around the story around Dubai. They've given it basically the weight of the most important city of the entire Arab world. It's a success story like no other. And if you want to talk about this success, like I said, you can't do better than Dubai. So they brought the heavy guns here. They bought all the best cameras. They bought all the most amazing systems you have for filming, and they designed this absolutely stunning sequence of Dubai that lasts about 20 minutes. I unfortunately don't have the whole thing. I have only small snippets of it. But it uses very, very stunning aerial photography, shot from a helicopter with a special gyro-stabilized camera, with a slow motion photography, with time-lapse photography, and any imaginable camera technology available today. And 8 months in the making. My part was 8 months just on the sequencing of Dubai and Abu Dhabi. Shot basically from October 2011 until May 2012, pretty much continuously, with sporadic breaks. I needed essentially views of Dubai that you do not normally see or that people have not normally seen before. I'm always trying to find a point of view that is really engaging, very different, just exciting, that you look at it and you recognize it. I know this is my city, but I've never seen it like that. I was going for that. So I did not shoot on any day. I shot on special days. When there was a special weather phenomena, like fog going over Dubai, I wanted to film that. It's a phenomenon not known to a lot of people around the world, but if you're a photographer and you're based in Dubai, you know about it. It's phenomenal. I mean, what we have here, no, I don't think any city in the world has. So if you're in the right time, in the right place, and you film that, I knew it's going to be an amazing visual. I needed to have that.
You were asking people on Facebook if there is fog in Abu Dhabi.
You had to follow, you had to follow. I was actually tied up with the meteorologist. BBC actually put me in touch with meteorologists that work for Dubai Airport. And they actually sent me reports well in advance, much more accurate than what you actually find, let's say, commercially available. Those were very, very precise. So I had my advantage actually to have a really, really accurate prediction. So if I knew when it was going to happen, I knew 48 hours in advance, which is probably a little bit better and much more accurate than commercial one, which is probably like 6 hours. So that gave me just enough time to find my place, just the right roof, to get the permission, to secure the permission, make sure the gear is in place when that happens. Now that worked in about 50% of cases. There was still a lot of hit and miss. I tried, I had all the data, I had all the resources, and it didn't happen. So planning, very important, but luck still played a very, very important role. Speaking of the planning, it's absolutely crucial and it's everything in this photography. Nothing just doesn't happen, okay? You're just gonna go over there and make it happen. It's not gonna happen. You need to plan. And how do you plan it? You plan it with Google Maps. There's no better way to use this technology than it would be for a photographer. You know exactly where you're gonna be looking at. You know where exactly you need to be, and you're gonna know also if there's something in front of you in the camera to obstruct your view. You can avoid all these surprises before you even get to the location. So Google Maps is your best friend. Use it. Spend a lot of time there. If you're going to make a serious architectural shoot or time-lapse shoot, use it whenever you can, all the time. It will save you the trip. It will save you a completely unnecessary trip. If you know that the place is bad or wrong, you're going to know from Google Maps. But if you establish that it's the right one, you still need to go to the location, see it with your own eyes, go to the location, make sure that this is the right place for you, and then, only then, start wasting your time asking for permissions. Don't do it before that. Don't waste your time asking for permissions if you actually don't know, if the location is not the right one for you. And that's how it happened. It was a big battle. Of 8 months of shooting, I spent probably about 7 months shooting, 7 months working just on permissions. That was the hardest part. And I needed to get to the airport. Try shooting at the airport. Not exactly easy. It's the worst, that's the worst place to ask for permission, but I managed to get it. After a lot of negotiation, probably 3 or 4 weeks of work, I managed to shoot at the airport. I managed to shoot at Jebel Ali Airport, another place where it's very, very, Jebel Ali Port, sorry, the Terminal 1 and 2. Another very hard place to get into, but I needed to get there because the part of the script talked about all the traffic. You can't build a city if you don't bring the shipping material. And there's only one place where you can build the shipping material, that's in Jebel Ali Port. So again, to communicate this craziness of traffic, of containers, of ships and trucks, bringing all this material, you have to shoot over there. So big battle was fought to get there, and I got it, and I shot there for 3 days, pretty much straight, probably like 16 hours a day. So a lot of time, a lot of gear, a lot of patience, and 8 months later, I managed to produce some of the footage that I'm about to share with you now. I want to show you some of the photography that I used, the gear. This is a motion control system that allows you to, it's a robotic platform that is connected to a computer that allows you to choreograph the movement of the camera through space, not just as a dolly, but it does also panning, tilting, and dollying. So just the way you would actually operate a real motion camera on a proper dolly, but in real time, This happens exactly the same way, but so slow that you can't even see it. So you will program your movement from here to here, and camera to look from down to up. And once you program it and hit play, you don't even see it happening, it's dead. But yes, it's playing. The camera's moving very, very slowly. And it's going to take it 3 hours to make that move from here to here and from looking down to up. So this is this platform. This is a dolly, and this is the pan, and this is the tilt of the camera. So it gives me full 3 axes of control. And there's also an actual add-on that you attach to the barrel that even changes the focus of the camera and zoom in while the camera is actually controlling. So all 5 axes are fully programmed, allowing me to make this very complicated move that you just cannot do any other way. This is what it looks like from another angle. Another tripod. This is also a motion control system that does only panning and tilting. So again, it's fully programmable, but it will not move the camera on the horizontal axis. It will only pan and tilting, but it's still really, really great because it allows me to actually send the camera where I need to be over time. So shooting various landmarks, mainly in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. This is the programming unit on the left side. It's based around the Pocket PC, which is now currently changed into an Android and also on iPad wirelessly. So you'll be able to control it completely wirelessly from an iPad. You program it. You have a graphic user interface. You program the key motion from A to B, from A to Z, whatever, and then you let it run. And there's a battery pack attached to the back that powers the pan and tilt. So each location, obviously, it's a hard-fought battle. So when you actually get to the location, you want to maximize your time. You can't be spending 6 hours shooting in one location with one camera and come back with 10 seconds of footage. Not productive. Go with multiple cameras and shoot multiple angles of the same location, and later on, each camera can give you about 10 seconds of footage. You maximize your time. So I would shoot with a still camera on one side, and with a motion control system, and another camera behind me. And sometimes I have up to 5 cameras on one location. And then later on, you choose the best view. When working with a production of a big caliber, like BBC, for example, they don't pick up just anything. They are absolutely, absolutely picky. And they will choose absolutely the finest stuff while discarding, and I mean literally trashing, 95%. So all your hard work, about 5% actually ends up in the film. So that will be a tilt shift lens that allows me to keep the vertical lines of the architecture perfectly straight on the extender. Extender that actually extended my view from 70mm to 34 on this particular lens.
I have a doubt. Regarding the camera battery, when you have prolonged shooting, do you connect your camera to external batteries?
Yes. Like I said, the system, I was using the battery grip with 2 batteries, which is more than enough for my case. It was never a problem. I never ever ran out of power.
The normal battery?
Yeah. Normal battery. So, because the thing is, you're not shooting continuously like video. You're shooting frames in between. So the battery is wasted only at the snap. So you go a long time. I would find myself shooting literally 24 hours straight without running out of power. Not a problem. And the motion control system, it actually feeds the power through the red wire. And this is also a data cable. So it actually controls the motion, plus it feeds the power through the same wire. And the battery itself is the size of a brick. Again, from the 5 bars that I had, I maybe dropped to 4. So, not a problem.
You know who makes these motion controllers?
Sorry?
Who makes these motion controllers?
This system?
Yeah.
It's called Camblock. It's a small independent company in America. And this is very, very high-end. This is the same system that BBC is using. I have one in possession. Very accurate system.
And this is 5D Mark II, if I'm not mistaken.
I can't hear you, sorry?
This is 5D Mark II, right?
This is 5D Mark II, yeah. So yeah, this is the motion control system, and this is a trigger box. It will, the trigger box will receive data from the control unit and then send a signal to the shutter button, to the shutter release cable. And that will be another place in Dira, right next to security camera, where I like it. That would be in Jebel Ali port. Cooking myself at 42 degrees, very nice. Another thing about what I really need to mention, the most important thing about time lapses is tripod. I cannot emphasize how important the tripod is. Don't go for anything cheap. Don't even go for medium. Go for the best. You cannot have tripod sturdy enough. Why is that important? In time-lapse, like I said, when you're actually finished, your time-lapse will play at 25 frames per second, right? But the time it took you, right, was very spaced out. Even the slightest motion of the tripod, by slightest I mean 1 millimeter, will show in the picture as vibration. It's not like motion video. When I'm actually tilting the camera in real time and I'm shooting 25 frames per second, a little bit of jitter will result in a slight wavy motion, right? But if you're shooting 25 frames per second and each frame is spaced out, okay, then all this will result in a very jittery, shaky movement. You can't have that. So very sturdy tripod, possibly with a weight under, to pull it down to make sure that it's really, really, really rock steady. And this tripod is a monster. This is how you get really stable footage. Plus there are other issues that I will not talk about this time, such as time-lapse flicker. This I will explain one day. This would be a monster lens. When you really want to get something really close, when I was shooting at Jebel Ali, there was a lot of truck movement and the place just simply was not safe. I mean, wherever you look, there's trucks and containers coming. You don't even know where to look. You're going to get squashed in a second. So they told me stand as far away as possible from the whole scene and just bring your big lens to actually get close to the action and actually compress the perspective of the entire scenery. And this lens, which is a 800 millimeter on a doubler, gave me 1600 millimeters of power. And that allowed me to bring really scene that was 2 kilometers far away, and it looked like it was right in front of me. It's a very good lens. Again, because vibration is not your friend, a gimbal would be more than enough in a normal situation if I was shooting a still picture, but in time-lapse, you cannot have any kind of vibration, not even a minor one. So I use a second tripod just to stabilize the lens in the front. And I even put sandbags on top of the lens to make sure the whole thing was pressed down and the lens did not budge. And in that place there's a lot of vibration. There's cranes moving, containers are being lifted, the ground was actually shaken under me.
What's the tripod you use?
Sorry?
What's the tripod you use?
The tripod? Which one?
Yeah.
It's
The
called...
big one?
Sorry?
The monster.
The big one. The big one.
The big one?
Yeah.
That's called Gitzo.
It's
Gitzo tripod, the 5541 is the biggest one they have. It can take up to 25 kg of weight.
Why is the color military camouflage? Is that
The camouflage, you don't want to draw attention, and the camouflage also deflects the heat because the black lens takes a lot of heat and you want to keep the heat low. Heat low means longer battery life. So it just pays attention. Less attention you draw to yourself, the better. That would be on top of a crane, very high on a crane, I mean, because this is an 18-wheel truck and it looked like a toy. So I was actually on the crane while the crane was actually moving with containers. That was one of the scariest locations I've ever been in my life. I had to mount a little GoPro camera, clamped to a handrail, to get the shot of a container lifted from under me onto the truck, which was really, really brilliant footage. There would be another angle. There would be the PowerShot G9. I could not have a heavy camera because of the vibrations, so I mounted it with the Manfrotto, the magic arm, mounted directly with a little stud that screws at the bottom of the camera. Again, to get a footage of the trucks being unloaded and then containers going to the ship. You have to improvise. There's another scenario when you have shooting with a 5D Mark II, when there's absolutely no place to even mount the tripod. I used 2 magic arms and actually fixed it between the handrails, and it worked beautifully. That would be a traveling dolly going along the conveyor belt in the airport for the actual moving sequences that are shot in time-lapse. Again, you have to improvise.
Yeah.
Shooting on the tarmac, planes landing basically right in front of me, and wind going over my head. This is one of the best locations. Shooting at the immigration. Police did not like that at all. I got stopped a couple of times, but then crisis averted. Then shooting a couple of sequences with Red Epic camera. This is not related to time-lapse, but it's also Wild Arabia. This is crew shooting at the airport. And that would be just a time-lapse gear heading to the airport. And this was one of 2 trolleys. Yeah. Yeah.
And this goes in cable.
And that's my favorite view. You gotta do what you have to do. Anyway, this is a little bit of behind the stills. I'm going to show you this little clip that is taken directly from the documentary, and it's a very small clip. There are many, many more where my work is featured. This is one of the quite interesting ones. This is, like I said, work in progress. It's not finished yet. The music is not final yet. There are scenes that are still missing, but it's going to be out in about 2-3 weeks, I hope. But this hasn't been shown to anyone yet, so you're absolutely first.
What a privilege.
Questions?
There is one shot where you are standing right in front of the runway, and I see
Yeah.
the planes dropping.
Yeah.
For that particular shot, did you keep the frame rate a little less, or?
No, frame rate was normal. I think I shot it every 5 seconds.
5 seconds?
Every 5, yeah, and exposure was about quarter of a second. Yeah. And I was perfectly aligned with the tarmac. They actually took me to that place, and I waited for it. And it was just actually I had to find out from which directions plane landed, because sometimes planes are landing from behind you, and sometimes from the front, and you don't know even 1 day in advance when it's going to happen and if it's going to happen. And you could be even on a wrong tarmac because there are 2 landing strips. So you could be waiting here and planes are coming over there. So we coordinated with the security and with the operations to take us to exactly the right place, right orientation, be prepared for it, wait for it, and then it happened. So like I said, with a lot of help and support, you can't pull that up. It's
I
impossible.
thought that shot was very challenging.
Yeah, that was the hardest one. Just to get inside, I mean, to get the camera crew into the tarmac, this was the
I don't
hard.
know, for some reason, that was my favorite.
Yeah, it's cool. I've done it already with Abu Dhabi one, but this is actually, in Abu Dhabi one I was way out of the airport, but I used big lens, so the whole perspective is quite compressed. The here I was right there, and I could smell the fuel.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool. But by far the most challenging actually was not even the airport, was the fog. Trying to get that done, just over there, that took forever. That was really, really hard.
And the one where you have used the long lens,
Long lens, yeah.
600.
Yeah.
Yeah, 802.
Yeah.
Having the trucks very near, you were very right. It looks
Exactly.
like-
Yeah, it's right close there. Yeah.
Good work.
In the fog one,
Yeah.
how did you have it at the same level of the fog?
Mm-hmm.
It was just above the fog.
Just above the fog. You see, the thing is, the fog is really weird in Dubai. It seems to be stuck up to the 20th floor. It never goes beyond the 20th floor. So during the night, it will be very high, in fact, above Burj Khalifa. But the moment it gets to like 3 o'clock, 3:30 in the morning, it gets dense, and the density of the, the mist actually brings it close to the ground. And it stays there, and just stays there for hours. So,
That's how you were at just above the fog.
just above it, yeah. So yeah, if you're on any roof higher than, let's say, 50th floor, you will be in a good place. Anything lower than 50, it's not going to work. You're going to be inside.
In the morning, until what time you can find fog like this?
What time?
Yeah, at early morning.
6:30 up to 7. Yeah, anything more than that. The moment sun gets above the horizon, fog will disappear because sun will just immediately burn it off. So the fog then goes up, and then it creates very polluted air that lens can't even see. The fog will get, the lens will get foggy, and you're not going to see anything. So you got to be there before dawn, up to the sunrise. So by the time you go to work, it's already over.
And we know regarding the transition from dark to light, or
Yeah.
from sunset to night,
Yeah.
there's a transition. How do you control that?
The transition, I don't know if you ever tried that, but if you ever try time-lapse and then you want to go from dark to night or night to dark, this is your worst enemy. It's the hardest thing to do. The reason for that is because, well, during the night, you need a lot of light. Yeah? So your exposure has to be long. And your aperture has to be all the way wide, right? You want wide aperture to have a lot of light. During the day, exactly the opposite. You don't need a lot of light. Light is your enemy. You want the aperture to be really close, your shutter very, very short. So how do you make transition from that to a single sequence? You can't do that. It's impossible. Right? Your interval that you have on an intervalometer is always doing the same thing. It's shooting, let's say, every 5 seconds, one picture, and your camera is in a manual mode. Your camera is always in a manual mode. You do not shoot in aperture priority. You do not shoot in shutter. It's always in manual. So ISO is fixed. Aperture, shutter, fixed. How do you make this transition? You do it with an external intervalometer that has bulb ramping. Bulb ramping basically means that your camera will not be in manual mode, it will be in bulb mode. Okay, so you're shooting in bulb mode, and the device itself will then control how much time the shutter needs to be open. So the aperture stays at, let's say, f4 or f8, whatever it is you choose. The bulb intervalometer will then choose what is the length of the exposure. So it's the actual the exposure that is changing from very long to very short gradually. So as the light is changing from day to night, the intervalometer will control the camera, making sure that shutter exposure is matching the exposure needed for that light change. That is the tricky part, and that takes quite a lot of practice.
And regarding the white balance, do you always use a
White balance is also a problem. White balance, as you know, will change. So during the night, it will be a lot warmer. During the day, it will be a lot cooler. When you're shooting the transition, the white balance will change. So if you set it, let's say, to let's say 6,000 Kelvin, the 6,000 Kelvin will be beautiful during the day. You know, exposure will be, all the whites will be nice and clean and white. But during the night, it's going to become very, very cold. So you actually have to, in post-production, animate the white balance. With a plugins that work on top of the Lightroom, you actually have to animate white balance to change over time. So you specify the target to be 3,000 Kelvin, but at the end, to have actually 6,000 Kelvin. The computer will then calculate the white balance and change it over time, so white remains white throughout the actual exposure. This is the tricks of the, this is the hard part of the time lapse, which is in fact harder than actual shoot, is the post-production. Getting rid of the flicker. Every time lapse always has a flicker, unless you know how to combat it and how to deal with it. Flicker is a flicker. The problem is when you're actually taking a picture, right, and you set it to f4, now the aperture, the iris, is actually mechanical. Each time you press a button, the iris will contract and open. Each time it contracts and opens, it doesn't actually go back to f4, but it goes to f3.98. Next time, it will be 0.2. So each time is different. So a very slight variation on this iris, played at 25 frames per second, will create a slight change in exposure time, right? And that slight change of exposure time will give you a very nasty flicker. I don't have any demo, but if you see a flicker time lapse, it's not pretty. It's really, it's horrible. And you have to, there are techniques of battling that on location, and if you did not solve it on location, you have to battle it later on in post-production with the flickering applications. So this is where a lot of time is actually spent, not actually shooting, but processing them. Yeah.
You want to know what flicker is? Just YouTube time-lapse. 90% of them have it.
Yeah. If you have electronic iris, all Canon lenses have electronic iris. You don't have actually any mechanical lever with it to control the iris, unlike Nikon. Nikon has a mechanical lever. It does not jump and flicker. So if you actually set it to f4, it will stay f4. It won't change. And this is why I'm using Nikon lenses on Canon bodies. So if you're a time-lapser, you really want a mechanical lens. You do not want electronic lens. You want complete control over the iris with a lever. Set it to f4 or f6 or f8, whatever it is. Just leave it on a camera, so you do not have to worry about the mechanical flicker from the iris. There are other flickers that are caused by the shutter. Even the shutter does not always stay at 1/50th of a second. There are slight changes, slight differences between frame to frame. That will cause flicker as well. So you're dealing with the shutter flicker, you're dealing with the aperture flicker, and you're dealing with the vibrations from all sort of environmental vibrations. So all this needs to be handled later on. That's a big battle.
I have one small time there.
Yeah.
Can you just
Sure.
make some comment on?
See over here, every moving object is thrown. You don't stop it, because your exposure was very short. You remember what the exposure was? 200, 300. It was quick, right? When you have a very fast exposure, every object will be perfectly frozen. Each time you take a picture, the motion is, as I'm saying, the exposure is too short for the motion to be actually shown. So what you do, you use ND filter, put it in front of the lens, and that will drop down the in fact, it will lengthen the exposure time, and that gives you a little bit of motion blur. The motion blur, when you play it frame by frame, makes a much more fluid motion on the actual object, which is a person, a car, or a boat. So always use ND filter. In fact, they're saying a good exposure for a person walking is half a second. Half a second during the day, as you know, is very, very difficult. You have so much brightness, you can't do it. So you have to do a lot of ND filtering. So I'm using like 8-stop or 9-stop, even 10-stop filter during the daytime to have that long exposure that allows me a bit of motion blur in time lapses. You need that. During the night, that is not a problem because it's darker up, so you can actually control it. But during the day, you have to handle that with ND. Anyway, I'm done.
Thank you.
I have a small gift for you on behalf of Farooq the Wet. It's just a
Thank you, Ricky.
we'll have 10 minutes break. Yeah. For a smoke or for a tea or something. Yeah. Before I forget, we are planning to have a small course on time-lapse